Good morning, King's Landing. That was a little Good Morning Vietnam reference. Chris Mandle, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good. Very good indeed. It is, what date is it? I don't know.
We're kind of 21st of November.
21st November, Jesus Christ.
Have you bought your Christmas cards yet?
When was the last time do you do Christmas cards?
Hell yeah, I do Christmas cards.
You are one of them. I don't even know why I bothered asking.
Of course.
I don't even know why I bothered.
Love sending Christmas cards, and they go out.
Oh my God.
Straight away, like 1st of December. I'm like Pam from Gavin and Stacey because it gives everyone all month to enjoy them.
Oh my God.
I haven't done them yet. I just bought them.
No, you see, I've not done Christmas cards. I don't think I ever did them really. I can remember my mum doing them as a child and like her kind of like displaying them on little washing pegs with on string around the kind of like picture rails in the house. And I don't know. The only people I get a card from is like my accountant, you know, and like the local curry house. That's kind of, you know what I mean? That's kind of it.
Those are the people that are thinking of you this Christmas. It's the accountant.
Exactly that. Yeah. You know what? My accountant really should be thinking of me this Christmas. It's been a tough year.
Because he knows how much you've been at the curry house.
Yeah, exactly. How's your week been? Talk to me about your TV week, the TV week of Chris Mandle.
Oh my God. Okay, so the TV week has been sublime because last night we watched we're on The Sopranos. That's our big watch at the moment in the household. And we finally got to the episode where Adriana gets shot.
Oh.
And I obviously knew it was coming because all season, in fact, I think in season 4 as well, she's sort of speaking to the FBI and she's sort of forced to help them. You know it's coming.
It's a painfully drawn out, like it's emotionally distraught.
And it was
kind of process.
You know, watched a lot of telly for a living, talk about telly a lot. I think that is one of the best episodes of television ever made. It is fucking amazing. And I'm just sort of like, there'll be even more in the final season because we watched the season 5 finale as well, sort of straight after. But that one of Adrienne getting taken out, you know, they sort of tell her she's off to the hospital to see Christopher, and you start to realize like a lot of quiet, big open spaces on the route to the hospital. It's just brutal. So that's been a big thing. We're doing Stanley Tucci's Searching for Italy, which is...
okay.
Have you not seen this? The Stanley Tucci Italy?
I no, because it will make me... Is this food one? It is food.
Yeah.
It will just make me hungry. I struggle watching food things because it always just makes me really hungry and just like really depressed that I'm sat in like my house in a dark November evening when Stanley Tucci's just bombing around, presumably some sun-soaked Italian landscape, eating amazing food with his trim figure, with his shirt tucked into his jeans.
With his turtleneck. Always the turtleneck. Well, there's one episode where he goes to a tomato farm and is hand pulping the tomatoes in the most crisp white shirt you've ever seen. And I was like, Stanley, you have never had to do your own laundry, have you? You've never had to think, that's not coming out. But it's really good. It's a really good show because it's produced by CNN, so it's really fucking expensive. And he just goes out and eats like a fucking king. But it's just, it's great. The one we watched this week, he is actually set in London. So he goes to see some of the Italian communities in London and some of the restaurants. I think what happened was... during filming, which was last spring, I think COVID sort of grounded some of their plans. So they were like, let's just do an episode in London. That's my theory. But it's really...
Did he go to Riva in Barnes at all?
He didn't. He went to this amazing place in Chelsea that hires Italian nonnas, like all the grannies, whose children moved to London. So all these like mums and grandmas that are like classic cooks, they work in the kitchens, but it's this like really cool restaurant in like Chelsea.
Did they? I presume they asked. So hang on a sec. So people moved from Italy to London.
Yeah.
to get away from their mothers. Yeah.
Quite possibly.
And then these restaurants
They get the
completely
mums over
ruined their kind of like shagging their way through London summer by giving their mums jobs. I'd have questions about that.
Can you imagine if they were like, "Don't worry, your mum's coming to work with you"? But it's a really good show. It's really
okay.
fun.
Well, I'll check that out. I'd like to throw onto the list for listeners of Dragoncast consideration, 1899.
Okay, yeah. I heard a lot about this on my timeline like yesterday for some reason. Did it come out yesterday?
I think it came out Friday, and then probably Sunday was the first.
Tell me everything about it. I don't know anything about it.
So, have you watched Dark?
Sorry,
have you done Dark?
Yeah. So, yes, done Dark. Now I know what it is. This is the show from the people of Dark on the ship.
Yeah, exactly that. So, for those that don't know, Dark is an incredibly dense time travel series that was, I think, first on Netflix. It was one of their early. I think it was pretty pioneering in terms of a foreign language. It was Netflix's biggest foreign language series to date, which then obviously led on to like Squid Game and Casa del Papel and all of those kind of shows being a great success. But Dark is in German. Quick fact: if you go back and watch it, put it on original language with English subtitles. They made I think it was a big learning curve for Netflix, was that the default for it was the English dubbed, and it was fucking awful, like really, really bad. But anyway, forgetting all that. So Dark, it was I think it was 2 series of Dark, maybe 3.
I think it was 3. I think there was 3.
Yeah. And it was a really intricately weaved, dense time travel science fiction story. And it was fucking incredible. It's one of the only time travel shows or anything that's tackled time travel that managed to solve the grandfather problem, which I think is like a common thread throughout, whether it's Back to the Future or whatnot. There's this kind of like, the big issue is the grandfather paradox, I think it's called, whereby what if the grandfather comes back and doesn't meet the grandmother? Do you then disappear? That, the whole Marty McFly's hand disappearing in the photograph kind of thing. They solved that. Don't ask me how, I can't bloody remember. But anyway, 1899 is the next project from the makers of Dark. And it's again, I am blasted through 5 episodes on the trot yesterday. Love it. It's like, it reminds me, what was that thing, that show, that series that had your man from Mad Men in it, that was on the ship? John
Slattery.
Man, hang on a sec.
I didn't watch it. I know the one you mean.
No, it was. Hold on a second. We will come on to Game of Thrones season 1, episode 4 in just a second, but this is important information. It had your man. Where is he? Jared Harris in it, and it was set in the winter on this kind of, in this Arctic expedition. God, hold on, where a sec. The Terror.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, which also had your man Mance Raider in it.
Kieran Hines.
Kieran Hines. Really, really good show. So go back and watch that. That's a good recommendation there, The Terror. It's only about 6 episodes long. And this has that kind of vibe. It's set aboard a ship, interestingly, 1899, and just weird shit happens. I always get a bit freaked out by things that set at sea anyway, especially when there's fog. But thoroughly recommend that. It's multilingual, so there's a third of the cast are Danish, there's English, there's French, there's all sorts German kicking off. It's great, so you will have to have subtitles.
Is it on Netflix?
Thoroughly. It's on Netflix. Yes, it's on Netflix. 8 episodes. Lovely. So you could do that in a good week
easily.
A nice wintry week. You could easily blast through that. So thoroughly recommend that. But shall we move on? Shall we get on to Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 4, Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things? Hey, it's Jamie here, just dropping in because I forgot to say this whilst we were recording the episode. What we're going to do now is play you the previously on Episode 4, Season 1, Episode 4 of Game of Thrones. It's a quick recap that would take you through the whole narrative of exactly what happened and who said what and who did what and where and all that kind of stuff. And we'll come back to you right after this. So see you in 1 second or 5 minutes. Game of Thrones, Season 1, Episode 4, Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things.
We're in Winterfell with Bran Stark, who is dreaming about following a three-eyed raven to Winterfell's crypt. When he wakes, Theon informs him that visitors have arrived. Theon orders Hodor, a gentle giant who can only say his own name, to carry Bran to greet their guest, who is revealed to be Tyrion on his way back from the Wall. Tyrion's met with hostility from Robb, but is calmed when he gives Bran designs for an adapted saddle that'll allow him to ride a horse despite being paralysed, and encouraging Bran to accept his disability. Tyrion refuses offers of shelter, sensing he isn't welcome, but before leaving, asks Theon where Catelyn has gone and mocks him for the Greyjoys' failed rebellion. At Castle Black, a new recruit, Samwell Tarly, arrives. The Watchman mocks Sam's weight, and Alyssa Thorne orders a recruit to fight him until he improves, despite Sam surrendering. When Jon intervenes, Thorne demands that 3 men fight Jon. They're all unsuccessful. Sam thanks Jon, but Jon warns him that cowardice has no place at the Wall. Daenerys and the Khalasar arrive at Vaes Dothrak, the only city in the Dothraki homeland. Her brother Viserys insults the Dothraki for marching away from Westeros. When Daenerys defends their way of life, he's infuriated. In King's Landing, Ned privately asks Grand Maester Pycelle about Jon Arryn, the former Hand of the King. Pycelle reveals that Arryn visited him the night before his death, seeking a book about the noble lineages of the Seven Kingdoms. Pycelle gives the book to Ned and tells him that Arryn's final words were, "The seed is strong." Peter Littlefinger Baelish, who promised Catelyn he would help her husband, informs Ned that Jon Arryn's former squire, Sir Hugh of the Vale, was knighted immediately after his master's death, and tells Ned that he should discreetly seek out Sir Hugh, as well as an armourer Arryn visited several times before his death. Finally, he warns Ned not to trust anyone, not even him. Ned finds the armourer in question, who tells him that Arryn came to visit his assistant Gendry, a strong, dark-haired young man. Gendry tells Ned that Arryn wanted to know about his mother and what she looked like. Ned works out that Gendry is actually Robert Baratheon's bastard son, with a strong claim to the Iron Throne. In Vaes Dothrak, Viserys attacks Daenerys after she talks back to him, but Daenerys strikes him across the face with a gold chain and concludes he's not wise or strong enough to return them home. Jorah tells Daenerys that the common people of Westeros do not care who leads them, so long as they have food and peace. Back at the Wall, Jon is partnered with Sam, who reveals that his father threatened to murder him if he didn't renounce his inheritance and join the Night's Watch, and they begin to bond, angering Alyssa Thorne. At the Hand's Tourney, a jousting tournament held to honour the new Hand of the King, Sansa and Littlefinger watch as the Hound's older brother, Sir Gregor Clegane, aka the Mountain, prepares to fight Sir Hugh of the Vale. When the Mountain swiftly dispatches Sir Hugh, Littlefinger explains to Sansa that the older Clegane brother was responsible for the Hound's scarred face. As children, the Mountain found his brother playing with one of his toys and so held the Hound's face in the fire as punishment. Ned is visited by Cersei in his quarters, who asks if they can put the past behind them. Cersei tells Ned he cannot change Robert's ways, only clean up his messes, and the two part on uneasy terms. Having disguised their identities, Catelyn and Roderick Cassel are staying at an inn on the King's Road when Tyrion arrives with his men in search of rest. Although the inn is full, a stranger offers Tyrion his room in exchange for gold. Tyrion spots Catelyn and greets her, revealing her identity to the other patrons. Catelyn identifies the houses of several knights nearby, all of whom are sworn to her family, House Tully. With loyal allies surrounding her, Catelyn charges them to seize Tyrion so he can stand trial for the attempted murder of Bran Stark.
Yeah, what did you think? What was your kind of reaction watching it again? Because you've not done a rewatch before, right?
No, not done a rewatch. And, I mean, look, we were surprised that this was chosen, but, the nation spoke. And
we respect democracy on this podcast.
We do respect democracy. It was, on the face of it, nothing happens, really. It was one of those kind of like, not a filler episode, but an episode that's needed because people have to get from A to B and people have to do stuff. I wish I'd just carried on and watched episodes 2 and 3 because, various things happened that I was just like, why are they there? Why?
Which bits forgot? Because I could probably help you thread this together. And for people
so help me through. Why did Tyrion come back to Winterfell? Was that purely to give Bran was that purely to kind of like make peace, or was he trying to find out whether they knew about Jaime and Cersei?
That is a really good question, and I don't think we really know. So there's two things. So he went up to the wall with Jon because he'd never been, wanted to have a look. I think on one level, he has to come back down the King's Road, which I think kind of goes kind of around Winterfell. But he was, first of all, I think he bonded quite closely with Jon. I think he saw an outcast in Jon and he wanted to do right by Jon. And I think he also, I think my AirPods just died.
Oh dear. Hold on a sec.
You know that, how do I check? Sorry.
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
I can hear you fine.
Do you know that I dropped one in a cup of coffee on Thursday morning?
Yeah, a cup of coffee.
While
the rice saved you.
While hungover, it was probably one of the worst days I think they have just died, just now. Can I take them out? Will that affect the recording a lot?
Shouldn't do.
Okay.
Shouldn't do.
Let's see how we go. How?
Can you hear me?
How do I sound?
You sound fine to me.
Okay, I'm just going to turn it up. Okay, that is really frustrating. I should have charged them last night. That's on me. So you were asking about sort of why Tyrion kind of goes back. I think really, it's important to establish that he is a bit of an arsehole, but he cares about people that are rejected by society for whatever reason. So I think Jon Snow, who is quite poorly treated as a bastard, he sort of sees something in him. And I think with Bran, as someone who has lost the use of his legs, I think there's an element of that as well, a bit of sympathy. And I think it's the first time we see Tyrion as being capable of compassion. And I think also just on a pure like plot level, it's like we need him to sort of talk to Theon about the rebellion, because that sort of needs to be established in the show, that Theon resents the Starks for kind of keeping him as a sort of formal hostage. Theon ends up attacking Winterfell next season for his father. He has this identity crisis about who he should be loyal to. So it's kind of to reinforce that. And also to try and sort of paint him with a bit more compassion. But it's quite weird, isn't it? To just have Tyrion hanging out with Robb. I think that's the only time they'll sort of talk now.
Yeah, I think the interesting nugget that I got, this apparently according to IMDb or Wiki of Ice and Fire, this episode is the first and only time in the series that no member of the starring cast is absent. Every single starring member of the cast is in this show, in this episode.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. That's quite
crazy.
a good yeah.
It's quite a weird episode because, as you said, it doesn't feel like loads of it. There's just constant setup because it's only episode 4, right? So Samwell gets introduced for the first time. Yeah. There's a lot of things moving very gently. But it reminded me of House of the Dragon in a lot of ways, because we're just waiting for that. We're waiting for that to get really sexy. And I feel like that's the same with this, where there's, Ned sort of investigating like Jon Arryn's death. I think that storyline is really hard to care about, frankly. Especially because
I quite found it. It's like, wow, this is a bit like Murder, She Wrote. It's kind of there's a real kind of, it's like a whodunit. And like, I'd forgotten how much of it was based around this kind of like seeking out the truth, and the scene between Cersei and Ned, and I kill my enemies, so do I, kind of thing.
That was a great line.
Was a great line.
Cersei is really interesting this season because she's quite enigmatic. Whereas by the end, she's like full like panto evil stepmother. By the end of she's quite like dialed up to 11 by the end of Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
not quite hard to know like what her deal is at the start, and I think it's very interesting how, first of all, like I think it's one of the maesters says to Ned like, "Oh, poison is a woman's weapon," and so obviously you're supposed to think it's Cersei. Yeah, but then of course we know that like Littlefinger is the one that poisoned Jon Arryn. We find that out like way later in the show.
Yeah.
And the smart thing to do is to use something that people would think a woman would use. It is all quite layered, and I think it does take a while to appreciate all the layers to the mystery. And even the sort of fact that we meet Gendry, for the first time, and that I remember sort of watching that, and it didn't click to me that like all of Robert's bastards have black hair, and none of his children do. And that's
that was far too subtle, I think.
Yeah.
I think they may labour the point a bit more later on in further episodes, but you know, that, like you say, that whole thing of like you see the cogs turning in Ned's mind, and you're just like, I had no idea what they were on about then.
It's funny how
the seed is strong and all those kind of references.
Yeah. And that he goes through this book, and if you listen, it's like, they're all people that are like, it's the birth records, and their physical features are written down so that you can look back, and that he eventually finds out, that all of the children with Cersei don't have the Baratheon signature black hair, which is really important, you know, and stuff. So it's very sort of densely layered, and I think it is very interesting. But
it invites rewatches. That's what this episode does, I think. And
it's really interesting.
I had a lot of sympathy for Cersei, actually. I think actually rewatching these earlier episodes explain a hell of a lot about how Cersei ended up becoming what she became.
Yes. She doesn't want it. She actually reminded me a lot of Alicent Hightower, who had been forced into a marriage for like the benefit of her father.
Yeah.
And is sort of forced to bear the brunt of it. I mean, the scene where Robert makes Jaime stand guard when he's got like women over, I'd forgotten about that, and I thought, God, that's a really fucked up thing to do.
It did contain the best line of the episode, though.
I know what you're going to say.
I bet you smell a blackberry jam. Come here.
As one of the worst lines in the series. I just curled up into a ball when I heard that. That line can't have worked in Westeros.
I think you should there should be like YouTube channels dedicated to people trying that as a come on line to their better halves. Like just putting a phone in the corner of the room, just like walking past their husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, just going, bet you smell like blackberry jam.
It's like a TikTok thing, like trying out Westeros pickup lines on strangers. But yeah, it was. Also, did you notice at the tournament the lad playing Hugh of the Vale?
We did. This was picked up on the Twitter space last night that you completely forgot about.
I completely forgot about it. I'm really sorry. I was making a curry.
Not at all. We did pick up on it. And I think it was Susan who jumped on, and because I was just like, was that the Lannister guy? I know he appears somewhere in season 1, and then one of the listeners hopped onto IMDb and it was like, so Hugh of the Vale.
He didn't tell House of the Dragon that he'd been on Game of Thrones.
I love that.
But so he was someone who was one of John Arryn's. He was his squire, got knighted, and I think that we find out later in the show that killing was, like a planted. It was a sort of assassination essentially under the guise of the tournament
to get rid of it, to get him out of the way. Should he have been passed information?
Yes, he might have known too much about what John Arryn was investigating.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. What else kind of happened?
With the Jaime Lannister and Robert Baratheon thing, with the hookers in the room.
Yeah.
Was Robert aware of? He wasn't aware, was he? Did he suspect? Why do we think he did that? Just purely to be a twat to Jaime?
He hates Jaime, and I think I think he hates the Lannisters. I think he hates all of them, really. But Robert is a really awful man in a lot of ways. He doesn't want to. He doesn't. Yeah,
I had a kind of skewed, kind of like rose tinted memory of season 1 of like Robert being the jolly kind of like pisshead who was just a nice guy. Cersei being like an evil, kind of witch that just wanted power for her dad, and actually. The one thing is done is just like actually the motive, everyone had kind of just cause, which leads me on to like Sansa was annoying in this episode because I'd forgotten how annoying and ridiculous and how petulant she was over her dad and the whole sacrificing of the direwolf because of what happened, I think in episode 2 by the river with Joffrey, and and actually that pivotal moment with that direwolf is kind of cost Ned his life and then kick-started everything. So we talk about the cat's paw dagger and we talk about this and that and the other, but the way that Sansa was towards her father and the way that argument played out between Robert and Ned and Joffrey and Sansa, that had as much to do with Ned being beheaded as anything did.
As soon as he leaves the North, he's fucked because, he's got a certain way of doing things. Northerners have got a certain temperament, a certain way of seeing the world. They're not suited to the South, and they're just like the direwolf in the first episode.
Says the man from Carlisle who can't cope with these soft Southerners.
I can't. I've changed since I came down here, Jamie. I'm betrothed to a Southerner. I've done the right thing. I've made political.
Okay, fine. So you've made a political allegiance.
Rob's from. I mean, betrothed is not technically true, but Rob is from Croydon.
I was going to say I didn't get an invite. Yeah,
but just like betrothed in principle.
Yeah.
And
he's going to listen to this. This is going to end up with you getting married. You know that now, don't you?
I don't know if Rob listens to the podcast. If he is,
my family have never listened to a single one of my podcasts.
What?
No.
I do quite a lot of mates would listen and check in, and they go, my mate Mike, who I gave a shout out to on the House of the Dragon finale episode. He's very happy. But no, I think I as a Northerner who had to come south for political and career reasons, I understand Ned's plight all too well. Yeah. But a lot of Sansa's thing this season is just she thinks she's got a fairy tale life ahead of her, and it's just stripped away layer by layer. And
but the whole pouty thing towards her dad, it just really annoyed me.
It is quite different. I mean, it's not a great season for her. There's not a lot for her to do.
No, there's not. No, there's not. I enjoyed. There was some. I mean, we saw quite a few people for the first time in this. We saw Samwell, obviously, big introduction to one of the biggest characters. And he came pretty fully formed, didn't he, Samwell? John Bradley was exquisite as Samwell, I think, and he kind of arrived. His hair didn't look quite as good, but he was all there, wasn't he? The full package arrived.
You get his story quite neatly bundled up in this episode. It's all there, and I think it's really interesting because he was from a very wealthy family. We meet his dad and his brother and stuff later on in the show, I think in season 6. Because he was the firstborn son and he wasn't manly enough, he was essentially stripped of his titles and sent to the wall. His dad said, if you don't take the black, we'll hunt you down.
Yeah.
It's fucking awful. Just give him a little holdfast in.
Just buy him just put him up somewhere.
He could renounce his title, but he forced him up, and that immediately
makes Prince Andrew, for God's sake,
Yeah, but it's just crazy. It's brutal, and I think the Wall is really interesting. The Night's Watch, once upon a time, was quite a principled place, and obviously we see it now in Game of Thrones, and it's full of murderers, rapists, criminals. Lowborn people. Jon and Sam are both from quite good houses, even though Jon is a bastard, and that's why Alistair Thorne hates them so much, because they're kind of not got ideas, but they're sort of used to a better life.
Nepo babies.
Nepo babies. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. But Alistair Thorne is a very interesting character because
he's great.
He fought for the Targaryens, and Robert, obviously, as punishment, was you're going to the wall. So he hates all the sort of the political elite, he might say, if he was,
They expanded his. There were a few scenes in this episode that were created on the flu, but it was written by Brian Cogman. He did it as a draft. Daniel, and this was the first episode that wasn't written by Daniel and David, and they gave it to Brian, who was a script writer on it. And they said could he just draft out an episode as to what he thinks episode 4 should be, and he did it thinking it was just an outline, and it ended up being the actual script. And he was a huge fan of your man who played Alistair Thorne. Oh God, hold on a second.
Owen.
It is Owen. Someone. It's Owen Teale. who's a Guildford School of Acting alumni, actually. And
Oh, wow.
he was a big fan of his. He'd seen him on stage in New York and expanded that scene where Alistair talks to them about the importance of winter and all of that kind of stuff. That was made upon because they wanted Alistair to have a bit more of a prominent role in it.
John has got the idea that Brotherhood is going to save them, and Alistair says, you know, you don't understand like how brutal it is out there.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, you know, all this time that the big threat is the wildlings, which are the people that just happen to be born on the wrong side of the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going, look, these guys are constantly trying to get in. And the irony is we know that there's something even worse than that. That even I don't even know if Alistair Thorne sort of entertains, because the ranging that they do doesn't really go that far.
Yeah, I mean, we're not entirely sure who knows. Well, I think they probably all know about the myth, but it's who believes it, really, isn't it?
Whether they've come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, really interesting. And I do think the wall stuff that's the hardest stuff for me to enjoy on this show, on this season. I do think it takes a long time. They're all sort of sequestered away from the rest of the show, and, you know, but it's a great episode, and, you know, it looks great. It does look great up there. I think
the acting, the performances are starting to settle down as well. Peter Dinklage starts to kind of feel a bit more like the Tyrion that we grew absolutely adoring. There are a lot of so we saw Samwell for the first time. We saw Bronn for the first time as well.
Yes, very brief. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
which was great. We also had mentions of a lot of people for the first time. I think Walder Frey was mentioned for the first time as well in that great speech that Catelyn does at the end.
Love that.
Which incidentally was Michelle Farley's. That was what she had to do for her audition. Was that speech?
Right.
But she also mentions. We got the first mention. Oh, actually, hang on a second.
Harrenhal.
We got the first mention of Harrenhal, of Walder Frey, of Hoster Tully, Lady Went, the King Beyond the Wall. So, and then I think Alistair Thorne mentions Mance Rayder for the first time as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of like just little teasers about just all of these characters that we've yet to kind of meet, which I really enjoyed.
What I think they do really well, I mean, this is why it benefits from a rewatch, is there's loads of detail. And the phrase, for example, we find out that Walder Frey is just about to turn 90. He's got a new wife. Like, there's all these kind of things.
All just become really important. Yeah.
And you understand, first of all, like, so Catelyn is, before she married into the Stark, she was a Tully. They're clearly in the Riverlands. The Tullys have, like, governance over this area. And so in the inn, you've got a lot of the houses that are loyal to the Tullys. And you get a lot of that just from that speech. It's like... and
it's a really clever way of including all these new names, but for a purpose that served the episode.
One thing, Catelyn is not normally seen in these kind of places because she is from a noble house, and when the woman who runs the inn finds out, she's almost like shocked that she's like worried that she like didn't even spot it. But then Tyrion, as a bit of a reject because he's a dwarf, he would have to go to places like that. He might get rejected elsewhere, or he's kind of one of those royals that is in touch with the common people and is happy to just hang out in a sort of really rough place. But yeah, it really sort of amazing that she arrests him. And it's just, watching it back, I felt the same last time when we talked about the pilot. It's all done on a complete misunderstanding. She thinks the dagger's his. It was Littlefinger's. Catelyn has been completely manipulated into starting a war. And it's kind of wild watching it all unspool,
just slowly unravel again. There was we also saw Bran's first kind of vision of the three-eyed raven, which was the opening shot, and I forgot how much I loved that. I think the whole three-eyed raven storyline was one of my favorites of the whole series. I loved it. I loved the mystery of who he was, you know, what the three-eyed raven meant is it a person, is it a role, is it, you know, all of those kind of things. Absolutely loved it. So I really enjoyed that. And there were the other things that were also mentioned. Who was it, Rob, that mentioned in that speech with Theon, he kind of gave mention to the uncles for the first time. So these uncles were like lunatics, and so he didn't. But they were very clever and didn't name Euron as being.
So this was Tyrion and Theon talked about the failed Greyjoy rebellion. Yeah. And what's interesting is that by the time the show came to cast Theon's uncles, they actually only cast one. He had three. And,
we know the other two were never mentioned again, were they?
No, and his brothers also obviously are like killed in the rebellion, and as the surviving son, he's taken hostage by the Starks as a political prisoner. But in the books, the uncles are like the most depraved, like just fucked up people. They're really like fucked up and weird, and one of them is known as the damp hair because his long wet hair, and he's sort of there's some weird like shamanic rituals and stuff. It's really like weird. I
love it. What's your name, mate? Damp hair. Perfect.
Damp hair, yeah.
I love that.
Damp hair. It's his second nickname. I can't remember his real name, but yeah, there's a very interesting. It's really interesting to hear about it, and I kind of don't know, having not watched season 1 for a while. Like I forgot about the finer points of this. That the Greyjoys kind of the fleet was burnt and they tried to attack Lannisport. So Lannisport, which is part of the Lannisters' kind of governance, is on the coast, the other side of Westeros. So it's on the western coast. So they're sort of primed for being attacked generally. And it's there's loads of history, there's loads of detail, and I think it's
there's even more. There was even more over in Vaesdoth Rak.
Dragon.
There was a lot in this episode, actually. Yeah, a lot of dragon chat.
It has one of Game of Thrones sort of iconic season 1. Like, let's explain what's happening while having a man getting off with a woman.
Yeah,
like sex position. I think there's a New Yorker piece that called it sex position, which was like people won't stick around for this chatting about Meraxes the dragon. So we'll have two people.
Can she pop him out? Yeah.
Let's have these two people bathing one another. So they talk about the decline of the dragons and how there's not any around anymore. Basically.
Yeah, that's it. And also they mentioned a hell of a lot of dragons as well, and only some of them we end up knowing about, or were actually in
well,
the
I think
books.
A lot of the big ones. Well, I think some of them are like the ones from after House of the Dragon, like so some of the really small ones. I think, but
one of them was a made up. One of them was a reference to, I think. Oh man, what was there was a famous. Let me just dig this up. I did look at it earlier on. They talked about one of the dragons, George R.R. Martin, put in as an homage to his favourite fantasy film. Oh shit! What the hell was it? What would it have been with dragons in it? Bear with me 1 second. Dragon Slayer. There was a Vermithrax was actually a dragon in the film Dragon Slayer. It was never in Game of Thrones. So he mentioned 9 dragons. He mentioned Giscar, Valerion, Vermithrax, Isovius, Arconi, Meraxes, Vagar, and Balerion, and the unnamed last dragon. But I thought it was quite interesting. They talked about dragon eggs. The later the dragons, the more deformed they were and smaller, which was quite interesting, kind of parallel to how the Targaryen, I guess maybe kind of incest, kind of interbreeding kind of thing.
There's a bit of thinking that like the existence of the dragons is sort of intrinsically linked to the White Walkers as the sort of fire and ice, but also magic generally.
Okay.
Might be cause the dragons to be stunted, the lack of magic, and the children of the forest, who are these, these weird sort of wood creatures that we meet later. They're driven out of Westeros when the Andals invade, and so there's this sense that like it's very like Greta Thunberg would love it because it's like all the natural things are dying. The more that we sort of like have our own petty struggles, but that some of them. I think there's a reference later where some of the dragons are like the size of a dog.
That was it, yeah. Imagine that. I'd love a little dog-sized dragon, wouldn't you?
Dog dragon.
Like the beginning of, like a little bit like the beginning of, is it the beginning of Jurassic Park, the book? Have you read the book Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
Where the guy carries around an elephant in a bird cage.
Yeah.
It's one of my...
Great. But it's they're really trying to sell through whatever means necessary. The dragons are gone. Yeah. And when that lady is, I can't remember her name. Lady.
Doria.
Doria says, "Oh, I'd love to see a dragon." He's just like, "What are you talking about?" Well, I've lost my erection now. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's like sad that they've all died, and he's
a little bit of foreshadowing of pouring the wax on him, which I thought. Yes, I thought that quite interesting. There was she also a little bit of foreshadowing from Doria as well. She gave a little shout out to the Faceless Men.
I thought that is a really, really slick reference, because she tells it to him like, "I've seen some stuff," and he's yeah, you drunkard. I bet that's not true. And then we obviously know that. So
I've saw a man, something to do with dragon glass.
A man with a dagger made of dragon glass.
Made of dragon glass, and a man who
changes faces. Yeah, the way that you and I would change our clothes. I'm just thinking this. So this man who's a faceless man, he's a paid-for assassin, and he was just going to the brothel. Do you think they're like, you get your first one free? So he's like, oh.
Yeah, it's a bit like put on a false moustache. It's like, hang on a minute,
I'm not back. I'm different. You know.
And also, does just the face change? Because after a while, they'd start to recognise the dick.
Well, I think you probably.
I think after a while, they'd be like, I've seen that mole before.
Yeah,
I've seen the way that that one's bigger than the other. Yeah,
never seen one at that angle before.
And did we never? I mean, everyone talked about it a bit later on when Arya was there. Did the Faceless Men? Did they change height as well? Was there?
You can change everything, because right. It's kind of like a trick. It's a trick of the. It's like it's in here.
Right. Okay.
So I think Arya, when she does her training in the books, becomes like an old lady.
Right. Okay. I understand that.
And with all the I can't even finish that sentence. Just becomes an old lady, literally.
So someone pulled up and noticed something I didn't notice either. It was Bruce. Thanks, Bruce. Mentioned this. He said my favourite part of this episode was Daenerys' handmaiden, who we just said was called Doria. Said Khaleesi has a baby in her belly, and Jorah just literally gets up and leaves without explanation. Like, I didn't pick up on that, and actually we know that he was, at the time, he was a double agent, wasn't he? He was kind of passing information back, and this is what led further down the line to his excommunication from Daenerys. But yeah, I'd missed that completely.
Yeah, and it's the line because I forgot Jorah Mormont's general. I knew he got like exiled, or he ran away from Westeros.
He was a very divorced man.
Very divorced man.
This is what dad's coping with a divorce well. Kind of
line thing. I actually laughed at was when he's like, I was slave trading. It's really illegal in Westeros. And she was like, why did you do it? And I had a wife with very expensive taste.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, he's got like a wag that's like, I want like more handbags, and he's like fine, I'll go into slave trading. Like, there's better ways, but also I just thought, and also the wife left him.
Yeah, exactly. And a very expensive wife who left for a different who's now with a different man. Yeah,
always in Harrods, and I just couldn't keep up, so I had to enslave people.
Marks out of 10 on rewatch for this one for you, Chris.
A good question. I generally find rating episodes hard, I think, because it's kind of one big story. I mean, I think a 6. Like, it's really good. It's just also like a bit like reading a Wikipedia entry about. Yeah,
I think on the face of it, you think, that's a bit shit, it's a bit boring. But then when you actually delve into it like we just did, and you realise how much of the future was mapped out in this episode, it's actually pretty cool. So thank you, listeners, for picking this one, because it was a complete curveball one to pick, but I actually enjoyed it far more than maybe like a big event based episodes. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Having said that, next week is the big one. It's the last season 1 rewatch that we're going to do. We are doing season 1, episode 9, Balon.
I can't wait.
Baelor. Balon's the dragon. Baelor's
Baelor.
Baelor's the sword. Right?
That episode is going to be amazing.
Oh, I can't wait. Cannot wait. It was you mentioned the Sopranos episode that you watched earlier on, but in terms of like, what this episode did for Game of Thrones, but also for just creative television in general, I think will never ever be underestimated, because it tore the fucking rule book apart, and I can't wait to watch it again. I've not watched it for donkeys, so I'm really
after next week's episode, we'll be putting up a poll to vote for season 2.
Yeah, 100%. Have you got any? Yeah, actually, we'll talk about favourites for season 2 next week. There will be a bonus episode going out tomorrow, which will be our introduction to the OA. So do stick around for that. If you've not watched the OA, I think you'll like it. But we talk about that next. So it'll be a little short bonus episode from us tomorrow. But until then, we will see you next Monday. As ever, get in touch on Twitter at Dragoncast_pod, or email dragoncast@daftdoris.com. Let us know what you thought, or leave comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. Chris, until Baylor next week, Dracarys, my friend.
Dracarys.